Hello everyone, Maurice here, and today I'm bringing you a early Mystic Era meta report for Axie Origins Season 5. Let's just actually jump into the data, and here's basically the gist of it already. Let's just jump into the archetype usage, and I did change a bit of the way that I kind of analyze my data. So now I separate things by brackets in terms of the victory star, so I call it V star. And you can see here are the data that I collected over the 3 days. So I actually collected data for day six, for Tuesday 6, so that this is the time after the marketplace has been open for the Mystic Runes and Charms, because before that, then people were just playing their epic stuff and whatever they crafted, and it's not too representative. So that's why I just selected these 3 days. And yeah, there's just one player who got to 2400, so that's why there are only 6 matches. But otherwise, you can see here the number of matches that's being analyzed, and here are the archetypes that are played in those matches in the particular bracket. And here I'm basically looking at players who basically started the game or started the match uh, at a particular bracket and using a particular archetype. Uh, and of course, obviously, there's only one player at the top, and that player has played basically 6 games of Topaz. So if you just look at the rest, you can see that they're basically at 2300 to 2400, which is basically just the top 15 or something, right? You can see there's less Leafy, more Topaz. And if you go down a bit at 2200 to 2300, that is, I would say, probably about top 100, 200-ish, right? Then you see a bit more Leafy, so Leafy is still around. And then, there's less Topaz. Interestingly, right, there's just more Topaz at the top. But Topaz is definitely still around and really getting pretty strong. And then we have the poison, and I actually separated the poison into Vinoki poison, right, which is the light blue, and then the, I guess, non-Vinoki poison, which is the light green. And if you kind of add them up, it's actually kind of, quite significant. It's similar to maybe, about 17% here if you add them up, or actually 20% around there. So the big four is basically Leafy, the poisons, right? Topaz, and then we have Jinx at the top, I would say. So Jinx, you actually don't see as much in the middle, and that's because like there's just a lot of Leafy. But it's pretty interesting that at the top you see like the Jinx, but then half Ocean Sponge is really pushing up there as well. So these are at the top 100-ish, and maybe at some point they'll push up to the top 10 or something. So that's something to look forward to. I would say. But there are also the certain trends as well. So you can see that Hot Butt is really getting squeezed out, I feel. As well as Sustain, you can see that Sustain is really not surviving too well at the top. So that's basically the gist of it, and you can see that I really didn't include like many other like archetypes that are not found at the top. So that's why you can see that at the bottom of the challenger, so this is the bottom of the challenger, which is still pretty high, right? There are a lot of people playing different things, right? That could include Triple R, like Glorious Main, and yeah, all those sort of different stuff like Momo and that kind of thing as well. So yeah, that's why there are a lot of others here that basically a quarter of the games were not classified, and mostly it's because I just didn't include those archetypes. Okay, so here's the gist of it. Like, of course, like depending on where you are. So for example, if you are about maybe top 500-ish, right, then you'll be about this bracket. Then you will expect definitely like a lot Leafy. So the big ones will be Leafy, Poisons, Topaz, and a bit of Sustain as well. And will probably see some Jinx. So okay, let's just get into actually some new data, and here is some data on the hours, right? So definitely check out the blog for like more information. But basically, this is sorted by like the hours. But of course, at the lower level, right? So in this case, it's lower challenger. It doesn't really make too much of a difference. And note that this is the UTC plus 0, so you might need to convert the time zone accordingly. But anyway, it doesn't make a difference in the sense that because there's so many matches, it kind of evens out over the time, right? Or rather, like for each time slot, because so many matches that I assume the percentage is pretty similar across the board. Okay, so but things will get a bit more interesting if you start to go further up. Uh, and you can start to see that certain archetypes are played more at certain times and maybe a bit less at certain times. So this might be interesting for those who are thinking about like avoiding certain matchup. Especially, of course, this is really only relevant to the top 200-ish. So for the vast majority of us, it really doesn't matter too much. So that's why I don't think I will include this kind of data at the main, video or main text other than this one. This is just to show that the data is there if you're interested in looking at it. Yeah, do check out my blog post. I will still include it in the blog post, so probably at the end where I put a data dump. But you can see here, right, it's quite significant that there's just not many Vinoki here, right? There's just a lot of people play more Vinoki poison here and so on. So yeah, you can definitely try to see which hours people are playing what. You know, but of course, this is an average across 3 days. Right? People can change over the days as well. So that's just a bit of information for those who are interested. Of course, I think this is probably the most relevant for people who are really climbing up the top. And I must say, it's really only relevant for the top 100 hours because for the rest of us, we really just play for fun. We queue in whatever. Like so, if we are just here, right, we queue in. Most likely you'll get an average of this anyway. Okay. Of course, here there's only one player playing, and that's for the 2400 plus. Okay, so let's just get into the win rates and matchups. So let's just look at the overall win rates, and I'll just make it a bit smaller so it can kind of fit the whole thing. So, okay, I guess I can still fit it here because you already know it is day 4 to day 6. And yeah, okay. So here is sorted by victory star points as well. Okay, so here you can see I only included these main ones that you can find at the top, and maybe confused will get kicked out soon at some point. But anyway, so you can see Topaz is really leading the way here. Especially at the top 10, maybe even the top 100-ish. So that's why I feel like Topaz is still going to be the dominant uh, you know, archetype. Do note that I've changed the way in which I calculate the win rate such that now you can see that these are basically players at a particular level, right? V star level, queuing like a particular archetype, what is their win rate, right? So of course, the people at the top will have a higher win rate than people at the bottom, just because like a lot of the time, sometimes people at the top 10 obviously will match with people lower than the top 10. And well, the reason they're at the top 10 is because they have a higher win rate than the people below. So, but still, I think you can see that the top 100-ish, which is these two columns, right, the 22 to 2300s. You can see the main ones are definitely Topaz, Poisons. I think Poisons are doing well. Leafy is doing okay as well, and I would say Jinx. So those are the main ones. And you can see Heart of Ocean actually is the one that I think might be able to push to the top 10. And it's actually doing very well across the board. So if you are really looking to climb, then Heart of Ocean Sponge might be a good way to climb, just because you can see that the win rate is certainly significantly above 50, I would say, across the board. Whereas, okay, something to keep in mind when you look at this data is that assuming everyone, okay, this of course this is an assumption, right? Everyone plays a lot of games, right? A lot of people are playing, and every player with every team, right, has a particular power level that they can reach, and of course the player strength as well, right? So then in the long run, you'll be settled at a particular V star bracket based on your team or your best team and your ability to play the team, right? And so then once you are settled there, by definition, it should be about 50-50, right? Unless the meta change. Otherwise, the matchup will be 50-50 by definition because you've kind of settled at that particular bracket. So that's why like most of these data is really like 50-50, and I think the only exception really is Heart of Ocean Sponge. So that's why I see that Heart of Ocean Sponge definitely has the room to continue to climb. Okay, so that is basically the gist. I would say one thing is that sustain, yeah, it's probably getting pushed out, I feel, from the top. Yeah, it's just because top 10 is really getting quite hard, I would say, for sustain. And hot butt is the one that's really getting pushed out quite a lot, is because yeah, the other archetypes might be a bit faster. And I'll actually get into the other archetypes one by one. Okay, so here I also separated by V star, right? And you can see that there's some general trend. Of course, there are differences across as well. Actually, something I should highlight actually is a very good example is Jinx, right? Something I should highlight is that there are certain archetypes that are good at a particular bracket, but not so good at another bracket. And there are multiple reasons. One is, of course, the matchup, right? For Jinx, it's just very good against Topaz, and you just see a lot more Topaz at the top 10, even top 100 compared to below. So that's one thing, right? There's just a lot more people playing Leafy at a particular bracket, and yeah, it's just tough for Jinx. So that's why when you are looking to climb, definitely look at what are the archetypes in the bracket, right? So you can just scroll back up here. You can see, right? If you're at this range, right, probably don't play Jinx, is because Jinx is not the greatest against Leafy, right? So that is the kind of thing that hopefully this information will be useful for people who are looking to climb. And of course, look at this information as well. So for example, you can see if you are a particular bracket, you play Jinx against Leafy, you'll be at 40% win rate, which is not great. All right. So that's something to keep in mind. Right? Combining this kind of win rate data with the frequency data on top, or the usage data on top. Okay, so let's just actually get into the each archetype and look at their kind of matchups. So let's just talk about Leafy first. Leafy is pretty standard, I would say. Standard by now in the sense that it's good against poison, suffer against Topaz, suffer against sustain. So yeah, it's yeah, good against Jinx. So that's really the main matchups for Leafy. And I think it's probably better to look at it here. Actually, no, I think this is probably easiest to look at here, just because here you'll be saturated by people at the top that really has more than 50% win rate. Okay, so that's for Leafy. So the main thing is that's keeping Leafy in the game is really Poison and Jinx. Okay, so because the top four is really Leafy, Poison, Jinx, and Topaz. Right, so Leafy wins against Poison, Jinx, but lose to Topaz and lose to Sustain. So for Poison, so I've separated into Vinoki and non-Vinoki Poison, and actually Vinoki Poison, actually something I forgot to mention. Vinoki Poison is actually doing a bit better. You can see Vinoki Poison is just slightly better at a particular bracket. Okay, still very similar, but the reason they are a bit different is because you can see basically here, right, or here, right, the Vinoki poison actually does suffer against a non-Vinoki poison. So that's one of the main differences, right, of separating between these two. Of course, there are some matchup differences as well. I think maybe against Sponge or something. So non-Vinoki is better against Sponge. But it's that's not really the main thing, I would say. Yeah, the main thing is actually for the rest is pretty similar. Right. It's just that non-Vinoki poison is doing better against Vinoki poison. Okay, so let's just talk about poisons in general. So for poison, yeah, suffer against Leafy as usual, I would say. And then the good part is that it's actually pretty good against Topaz and pretty good against Sustain. Of course, can't be said for the top Topaz. The top Topaz is just very strong. But the main thing keeping Vinoki or just poisons in general in the game is really Jinx I would say. Topaz is still quite a good matchup, um, depending on, of course, how good the Topaz is and stuff like that, right? But I would say Finoki still good against Topaz. Not Finoki, sorry, poisons in general, right? So you can see these two poisons. Good against Topaz, good against Jinx, good against Sustain, but Sustain is really getting pushed out, but suffer against Leafy. So you can see how these four archetypes really you know, beat each other basically. So for Topaz, yeah, yeah, good against Leafy. So that's really the main matchup. Suffer a bit against Poison, I must say. Unless you are at the very top, then it can be like very optimized. But still suffer against Jinx. So Jinx is really the main thing that's keeping Topaz in check. As long as Leafy is still around, then Topaz is still going to be good. Yeah, poison. So I think that's why poison, adding in poison really changes the dynamic quite a bit, right? Poison is a very interesting spot, right? Where it's doing well against other things except for Leafy, whereas Leafy doing well against Jinx and um, yeah, and poison. But then Topaz doing well against Leafy. So yeah, so basically what's keeping Leafy in check is mostly Topaz at this point. Just because sustain is really getting pushed out. So yeah, I'm not really talking too much about sustain. Yeah, it's just the only thing that's keeping sustain alive is Leafy. Other than that, it's just tough. For Jinx, okay, so same thing can be said. Right? The only thing that is keeping Jinx around is really Topaz. Of course, is also good against sustain, but sustain is not really around that much. So the good matchup for Jinx against Topaz is what's keeping it in the meta. I do feel like it will get more and more as people are just basically going to play Topaz. Then there'll be Jinx that's going to counter Topaz. And then there'll be Leafy that's going to counter Jinx. And Poison is really kind of in the mix there, that's doing well against some and not others. So yeah, so that is basically like the gist of the meta so far. Of course, this will all change, right? Depending on how the meta evolves, yeah, and how people tech against different things as well. One thing I should point out is okay. So hot butt, yeah, really not doing too well. Just suffering against most things. I guess except sustain, right? Yeah, hot butt even at the highest level, it really suffers against Leafy as well. I won't say suffer, but like can do against Leafy, I guess. So basically, the only thing keeping Hotbutt that's kind of hanging in there is really Leafy. But as more Topaz are coming, then Leafy will also go down and Hotbutt might just not make it. And the other reason why Hotbutt might not make it is, of course, the Heart of Ocean Sponge, which I think could be up and coming, just because it can deal with Leafy. The only tough one is really Topaz. So yeah, that's the thing, right? Topaz keeping the sponge in check as well. So this is kind of the dynamic of the current meta. But I do see that Heart of Ocean Sponge will continue to climb up until the point where you get to the top of the meta where you do see a lot more Topaz, then that's when it probably kind of like hits the point where you stop climbing. That's how it is, I think, at this point. So, of course, still very early. So I'm just going to scroll to the conclusion here and just to say that yeah, of course, things will still change, and now it's only getting to day 7 of the era, and we still have a whole week to go. So yeah, let's just see how the meta will change. And my assumption is that it will basically be, my prediction, I would say, is Topaz. Then there's Jinx that counters Topaz, and Leafy that counters Jinx. Of course, then Topaz is good against Leafy, and then Poison is kind of around there as well. And then Heart of Ocean, Sponge, like bubble stuff, can I think squeeze in as long as there are other archetypes that's not just Topaz around the top. Okay, so that is the 5 that I would predict will be at the end of the season, but who knows? Maybe some people, some players might come up with some new, completely new archetype that just break the whole meta. But haven't seen that yet. But well, we'll see. So of course, this time I actually have changed the way in which I've analyze my data. So do give me some comments or suggestion as to what kind of data you want to see or like how the data should be you know, I guess presented and so on. So yeah, feel free to leave a comment. Of course, can also reach out to me on X or Twitter or Discord as well. And yeah, okay, so that is it for this meta report. Yeah, so thanks for joining me and good luck and have fun in the arena. And I'll see you in the next video.